Wait a minute. What's so amazing about grace?
You are listening to All Things Grace podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Michelle Majors. This podcast is dedicated to answering one question: how can we move through life with more ease and flow and grace? How do we bring grace to family drama, our careers, our bodies, and health? What about racism and oppression? Or the most challenging of them all, ourselves? It's all about grace, y'all. Let's talk about it. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to All Things Grace podcast. This is Dr. Michelle Majors, and this is an absolutely special show. We are going to be talking about nonviolence and community transformation. Joining me today is someone who is so awesome, and just you'll find out more as we talk. Bjorn Peterson and I went to seminary, right? That's seminary, Seattle School of Theology and Ministry. And as I was reading his bio, one of the things that was said is that he's known internationally for his calming and clarifying presence and thought partnership that affirms, challenges, and catalyzes action for change. That calming and clarifying presence, I can attest in our classes sometimes. When he opened his mouth, it's like you feel the energy just, okay, everybody calm down. And so I really have always appreciated that about Bjorn. Bjorn is a descendant of Norwegian and Swedish immigrants, and now you live in. You say the name.
Yeah, it's all right. I live in a town called Matamidi, which was taken from a Dakota description of a nearby lake known as Mato Meda. And I'm not even saying it right, so no worries at all. But so we live in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Minnesota, and it's great to be with you.
Yeah. So other than being a poet and a writer and a woodworker, you are a scholar and practitioner of nonviolence and community transformation. And right now you work as a community peace builder at Nonviolent Peaceforce in North Minneapolis. And so we're going to learn a lot about what you do there, but let's start off with the question of practitioner and nonviolence and community transformation. What is that even?
Oh man, it's a lifetime of searching, isn't it? You know, I think, like you said, we met in seminary. We met in a school of theology and ministry, and I ended up there because I think, growing up, I had this question put before me all the time. I think you'll resonate with, which was or this idea that we should love our neighbor as ourselves. And so this was something I heard all the time. My dad was a minister, and I grew up in Christian churches where that was spoken about. And as a young person, I took that seriously. I thought, all right, love my neighbor as myself. Okay, that sounds wise. Let's go with that. But then as you grow older, you realize that it's actually such a complex statement. First of all, to know what loving action looks like, to know what a loving heart takes, to love yourself, to know yourself in order to love yourself. Actually, you end up in this process where to love yourself or to love your neighbor as yourself, for me at least, has taken on this element of nonviolence and community transformation, because first of all, I want to stop doing harm. I'm born in the body and in the place that I'm born in. I'm born into these systems. I'm born into these dynamics that predate this body. But that doesn't mean I don't benefit from them. That doesn't mean there aren't things that are built right in from the moment I'm born. And so in some ways, the idea of just loving my neighbor, as you start to recognize and study and think about and hear people's experiences, you go, man, that's not my experience. Or, wow, I've had a similar experience, but I never thought about it that way. Or you start to recognize that to love your neighbor is like a tall task. It's a tall task. It seems simple. And then when you set out to do it and you do something from a loving heart, maybe with intentions that are good, the impact is not where the intent starts. And so what does it look like to bring together more and more for more moments of the day, my intent and my impact? And so asking those kinds of questions has been at the heart of, and sometimes people are like, I sound like a philosopher and so on. I'm like, yeah, I like philosophy and stuff, but these are really practical questions to me. These are really simple, boil it down. I walk out the door, I live my life, and do I hurt anybody? And if the answer is yes, well, dang, how do I not hurt somebody? And that again sounds pretty simple especially to my 10-year-old self, but to my 40-year-old self and older, I started to go, man, by breathing every day the air that I do, by living in the space that I do, I have potential to participate in systems and in actions that harm people. And so nonviolence as a practice is about, for me, trying to string together the moments where I am participating in the world in ways that do no harm first, but then secondly, that transform me and the community that I'm a part of so that there's no harm going forward. It's a big ask, but it seems like something worth doing.
Yeah. So how does that, as you walk through the world in a white male body, and you're contemplating, you're doing your reflection and you're doing all of the things, and you still feel like you're messing up or you're doing harm. For a lot of people, they then pivot to guilt, right? For a lot of white folks, they go into guilt. And I remember a coach one time telling a white male, guilt is the easiest way to get out of responsibility and action. If you just feel bad enough, then you feel okay because I feel bad. That's a confirmation that I am a good person and that I didn't want to hurt you, my bad feeling. But there's something about being accountable in a way that holds that harm doing, but yet you can still stand in that and move forward. How do you navigate that guilt with the action, and what does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that I feel like I'm always kind of wrestling with in myself. I think when the guilt comes, part of it is that in some level it's a natural reaction to encountering things I don't want to see or I don't want to feel. I have this emotional reaction where I'm like, that's no good. But then when the guilt sort of sets in and settles as the end point for the emotional journey, then it doesn't get to action, it doesn't get to change, and ultimately it doesn't get to liberation, even for me. So the guilt for me as a white man is not actually liberating, not in the sense that I actually would like to experience, because all it does is kick the can down the road to the next moment I feel guilty. The next moment that I come face to face with my power and privilege in a way that it undoes me, that I'm undone, right? And so to me, even my own liberation, understanding how that is tied up in the liberation of all people, that guilt is not the road to that liberation, to that shared liberation. And so guilt is not a useful, pragmatic approach for me. And I want to be pragmatic, even though I'm a poet and I'm a philosopher, and I'll say things that'll make people go, whoa, there comes his woo-woo. I remember some students saying that one time, and I was like, yeah, I hear that, but like, this comes from a really pragmatic place for me, which is like, how do I live well with the people around me? And so ultimately the path that I try to choose is a path of commitment. And that commitment means coming back again, wading through the emotional muck, trying to do that work, trying to learn and listen as much as I can, keep showing up and trying to build the relationships, because the relationships are what's liberating, right? It's liberating to sit with you here today, even though I might put my foot in it. I might say something that we both regret. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe I invited him on. But ultimately, like, I'm not worried about that, because relationally we'll work through it. And without relationship, then it ends at negative emotions. And without that kind of commitment to relationship, commitment to returning to one another, then that's where it stagnates, and it becomes toxic, and it becomes things that ultimately don't help. That's my initial reaction, but yeah.
So before we hopped on, before we started recording, you talked about everybody wants to experience grace. Everybody wants to experience love, but what does love and grace ask of us? And what does love and grace ask of us in your perception?
Yeah. Well, it asks a lot. It's, I think there's a perception sometimes that people who talk about love or grace are offering people the easy path, or the safe path. But actually, I think what we're really asking is for people to walk a path of incredible risk, and where there's a fierce possibility not only of transformation, but also of destruction. We can be, when we submit ourselves to relationship, when we make ourselves vulnerable to other human beings, it's only vulnerability if there's still risk involved. If it's not, then it's then it's emotional manipulation. And you see that. You see people who know how to practice what appears to be emotional vulnerability, right? But they're not really risking much, because maybe it's something that's practiced, maybe it's something they've said 100 times, maybe it's like they've worked through, and so there's not risk there anymore, so they kind of keep away from that risky area, and then hope for an emotional response from the people that they're with, or the person that they're with, which is, I think, sometimes what happens, or what's experienced a little bit when folks, maybe they have an emotional response to a difficult conversation, and the tears come, and there might be something real there, but perhaps it's a real spot that they haven't pushed through, that they keep coming up close to, and then retreating from, because it's too painful, and it's too uncomfortable, and that's not a life that they have to lead very often. Maybe they don't live in relationship to much discomfort in their life, or much suffering in their life, and so coming up close to it, whether that's like guilt over things around race or gender or other expressions of oppression, they retreat, and therefore they learn how to perform at that space, but they don't do what love and grace actually ask, which is to continue to wade through that muck and that difficulty, to try to see what else might be out there for you. And I know these things are a little bit abstract, but I think when we think about what the body feels in those moments, and we can describe it in ways that are helpful for people.
So as a community peace builder at Nonviolent Peaceforce, I hear, I think about how seemingly difficult it would be to really bring people into the experience of nonviolence and being able to connect with one another in different community spaces. Actually, even in the same community space, we're not a monolith, right? And so what does that look like? And what are some of the things that you bump up against to be able to bring forth this conversation around nonviolence and love?
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult, and you know, the program I'm a part of that we're really kind of launching right now. I joined a really established practitioner in North Minneapolis named Will Wallace, who's been a part of that community for decades, and joined him and some other folk who are doing really interesting work. And so we're really at a trust building stage right now. And that trust building is not fast, right? That trust building, it takes so much time. And this is where like commitment comes in, right? Like it's not just right action once, it's right relationship, which is across time. And so, but I also find grace in that, right? Because I find that, like, okay, I stepped in it yesterday when I was engaging with so-and-so. That will bother us both if I disappear tomorrow, more than it will if I come back and we have a relationship and we work on things and I learn from what I stepped in and I take accountability for my actions and live in better relationship. But again, that takes time. And so one of the things that, you know, you run into when you want to talk about nonviolence is when violence happens in our world, you know, first of all, we would say that violence is an expression of unmet needs, meaning there are needs that are being met and they are not being met, and therefore violence is happening. We would say that conflict is inevitable, but violence is not. And so we're not very practiced at good conflict. A lot of us, anyway. Many of us are conflict averse to the point where we just avoid it. And so a lot of what we try to do is help people gain self-awareness as to what goes on in me in conflict, right? So we have those kind of conversations. But on an even more basic level, part of what we try to do to invite people to on this conversation around nonviolence is to think about where safety lives in us. And what does safety mean to us versus even security? What's the difference between a safe community and a secure community? And we would tend to argue that security is fear-based, whereas safety is affirmative, and it's affirming, and it's collectively held. One of my colleagues, Kalian Mendoza, who's out in New York and does amazing work with the Asian community who have experienced so much anti-Asian violence and hate in the last number of years, of course, growing on for a long time as well. But they like to say that we keep us safe. And there's a lot in that, in that idea that safety is a community held reality. And so if within our community, you know, writ large, the bigger community or even smaller expressions of it, that violence is happening, whether that's state sanctioned violence, whether that's violence among community members, there are unmet needs that are leading to those expressions of violence. And so part of what we're trying to do is help people imagine what safety would look like for them, and try to live out of that imagination. And it's difficult at times, but our bigger thing is presence, it's listening, it's building trust, because when those things aren't available, then lots of needs go unmet, lots of human needs go unmet in our shared life. So
that's really interesting. I just had this conversation. So in a few hours here, I'm going to talk to an organization and talk to their board, which is in major conflict. And there's lots of dynamics. And like in every board, you have people who've been there forever and they do well, that's just how we do it. And then oftentimes they're white. And then they say, we want to be diverse. And they bring in different voices, perspectives, and opinions. And they were like, whoa, we didn't want diverse voices. We just wanted diverse people, right? And so I'm having the conversation with them tonight or in a few hours here. And it's rooted in this conflict, what we're going through right now. Each person is expressing and living out an unmet need. And I talk about for myself in, going through times of homelessness and that safety and security conversation, even how you said it, it was like, I felt it in my body. And so this idea of safety and security. And so now I bring all that with me. And one of my needs that I'm constantly trying to soothe is around being heard, because when you are poor or when you are homeless or you are invisible, and people don't really, it seems like you don't matter. That's the feeling, right? But so now I walk through life and I have needs around being heard. And so when I get interrupted, I get very angry, like irrationally, it seems outwardly, especially I'm like, Grace, don't interrupt me, And so the importance, I bring that up because we all bring these unmet needs with us, and they just live there. And how do we not put it on you, Bjorn, to soothe my unmet needs? One, that you don't know are my needs, right? So you may say something that triggers, and nonviolent language makes me
activate.
There it is. It activates me, and you won't even know that I am holding you to that thing that lives in me. And so I find that when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, that's it. So whether you're talking about individuals or communities, how we describe and talk about the ways in which they move in the world and the decisions that they make are based on the choices that are juxtaposed to the needs that they have, right? And sometimes you could say, well, what about somebody who loots a store? Or what about somebody, right? I don't know what their story is, right? And so it's important. That's where grace comes in. Grace is basically saying, hey, I don't know your story, but here's mine. And so I'm always on the front leading with my own life and stories and how I move in spaces. And I don't get it right all the time. My grandfather said, healthy relationships, you can tell how healthy a relationship based on how well you fight, right? If you can fight well. And like you're saying, we don't do conflict very well, right? So how well you do conflict. And so I'm like, oh, okay. And I have a husband who's completely averse to conflict. So I'm leaning in like, yeah, let's fight it out. Let's get to this. And he's like, whoa, calm down, right? So I really think that if we could get to this place where we recognize the stories behind the person, that would absolutely be a game changer in conversations about race or just connection, just humanity, and see the human person behind the story.
Totally. It's very true that for not everyone it is always safe to be vulnerable. Okay. So I want to we got to name that, obviously, that for a lot of people in times and places where they just cannot, is not safe enough. It's too risky.
Yes.
So we said vulnerability includes risk. That doesn't mean it needs to include all risk, all times, all places. Let's say that. But there is something very real that also happens when I'm vulnerable with you or with a community that I'm a part of, where most of the time, with most people who are functioning within their most normal selves, there is something that responds within us to one another's vulnerability in our storytelling that is transformative. It's almost magical to me, the way I almost liken it to, I know you're a gardener. I almost liken it to the way a flower somehow will follow. You think this flower isn't moving, right? But if you look at the flower at the beginning of a summer day and the end of the summer day, that face will turn toward the sun for the whole day. There is something imbued into that flower that stands up at attention to the sun. And I think there's something similar almost within us, that when we see, most of us, most of the time, when we see in one another a vulnerability, there is an awakening and alivening in us. I can't explain it. I'm not a neuroscientist or a biologist. I'm just some guy, but I've seen it enough to know that something fascinating happens when somebody's story is told, that almost like a flower turns its face to the warm sun and greets it. There's something that happens within us that's similarly powerful. And it doesn't make everything okay. It's not it's not everything, but it's a start. It's an opening. And I'm fascinated, I'm fascinated by who and why comes to these conversations and sticks around, right? When we are differently motivated and differently advantaged or disadvantaged by the oppressive systems that we live in, I'm fascinated by why one white dude with tattoos and a beard is like, yeah, let's talk, and the next one's like, I ain't got time for this. And I'm fascinated by what that difference is and why, and not from like a totalizing standpoint, but from a what got activated in me once, twice, 100 times to begin to develop a commitment to the conversations and to the work, to recognize the transformation that goes on in me. And I think, I look back at our time together, 13, 14 years ago already, which is bonkers. When we were both 6 and in grad school. And like, I can say without a doubt that it is women of color in my life who have opened my eyes to a whole lot of things, but maybe more than anything else, the power and transformative nature of storytelling and of story knowing. Let me put it that way too. It's not just about, can I make my voice heard? It's also about understanding, listening deeply and closely to others' story, listening deeply and closely to my own story. An awful lot of words come out of mouths of people who don't know themselves at all. And so how's my story at work in me is an incredible complication. And for me, it goes back to that question of loving my neighbor as myself. What does it actually take to love my neighbor as myself? And what am I committed to doing to living in that life of love? And it turns out it's an awful lot of vulnerability. It's an awful lot of difficulty. It's an awful lot of, for me, stepping back and recognizing where my power and privilege limits my ability to understand the story that I'm hearing, right? Or that I'm trying to know. But coming back again and again.
Yeah. You said earlier about people not feeling safe enough to be vulnerable and to share. And I'll tell you, time and time again, when I lead some kind of session and it calls and I share my story, inevitably the people of color, in particular Black women, are the first ones to share their stories and talk about what they experienced and what they need. And it's usually met with white folks that are freezing, because how do I respond to that? And there's a lot of dynamics around, if I say too much, am I taking up space if I don't take enough? Or if I say the wrong thing, then right? There's lots of systemic, that's part of the system to keep people bumbling and rambling and clumsy, as opposed to, wow, I can't even imagine, or sharing from their perspective, or, thank you for sharing that, because I also had an experience that was just like that, where I was afraid and I didn't know what to do. And it opens the door for something, but it's really interesting how the people who have the most to lose are often the ones who are leading the effort, are on these committees, these DEI committees, and investing time. And so I think I want to pivot for a second and ask you about, as I'm talking about the ones on the front lines being, or the ones having the most to lose, being on taking the lead. It's exhausting. It's very exhausting, and it's infuriating when you put yourself out there and nothing comes of it over and over again, and they keep showing up. So how do you, in community space, or just in this conversation, think through or think about hope, right? When you have people that are exhausted, you have people that are guilty, and right, and what keeps you in a state of pushing through, a space of hope, a space of grace for yourself when you put your foot in it, as you say. What is the thing that keeps you alive and living well with the people around you when there's so much cynicism and resignation and hopelessness and frustration?
Yeah. Whew, that exhaustion is real, isn't it? And I think this is a really important question, and thanks for raising it. And I'll be curious to know what you would say too. But the thing that comes to the forefront of my mind is a concept. I like reading. I like talking to people and learning and borrowing what helps them. And there's a woman named Joanna Macy who's written about this idea of active hope, and she makes this difference between active hope and what she kind of what she's saying is that there's kind of two kinds of hopes. There's that optimistic, Pollyannish, it's all going to work out kind of hope that gets thrown around, right, every day, which is like, yeah, things will probably work out. We're probably going to be fine. I don't know what your big deal is, but or who are just like, if we just work harder, we're gonna do it. We will see change in our lifetime. And I'm like, yeah, I don't see that happening. Like, my 6-year-old is going to have to do all the work I'm doing. He's a little blonde-haired white male presenting boy, and like I don't see him not needing to do this, and so that's a question as a parent that I think about, but which sucks.
Yeah,
that sucks. That just sucks, and that sucks more for others than it does for me. Like that's also real. So where do I find hope in the midst of all of that?
Wait, I want to
go ahead.
Poke at that one. Why do you think
please.
it sucks more for other people than it does for you?
Well, in a very real way, I don't think it does. Like I believe in our deep connections as a humanity, and so I don't really feel like I can live like so much of the discontent that we see out there, or so much of the ugliness, the hopelessness, the deep sense of unease that people are living with, I do think is deeply and directly connected to systems of oppression and racism and so many forms of violence that are out there. But also, I recognize that for your Black husband and me, there are different risks involved in crossing town.
Got it. Okay.
So it sucks more for your husband.
Yeah.
Only because, do you see? So that's the part that like there's a nuance there, and I appreciate you pulling that out.
Okay.
Because there is a privilege that I have in this body where, I'll give you an example that works into this. A couple weeks ago, I was participating in a training here in Minneapolis, and we were working with some people who do emergency management in the Minneapolis Public School District, which following the murder of George Floyd ended its relationship with the Minneapolis Police Department. And so it's been on a journey of trying to find some other conversations around safety, and my organization's been a bit of a part of that. So we were in this training, and I was with a gentleman, and he was explaining how his lived experience with encountering the police in Minneapolis as a Black man is obviously so very different from mine. Now, the conversation, the question that had gotten asked for us in this small group was, where do you feel afraid? And so the true answer for me is, I feel afraid inside. Most of my fear happens internally. I don't face the same outside fears that this man expressed. And yet I'm not even practiced in talking about my fears in that way. So when the conversation happened and the two Black men that I was sitting with talked about gave their answers, and then it came to me, my brain was switched on to external fears, and I didn't know how to quite turn it to. I wasn't ready. I hadn't really thought about it. I was just kind of in the moment participating. And so I kind of bumbled my way through the like slightly less stupid way of like, me too, the police, gosh. Right? Aren't they just a real, drain on my life, right? So like I'm sitting there trying to like qualify, but also recognize that like, because of some lived experiences I have and some negative experiences with the police, like externally they are probably top of my list, but like sharing that in that moment, not the graceful way to proceed. Okay. Did I handle it brilliantly? I didn't. I don't think so. Probably not. I don't think I blew it up so bad that like, he's thinking about it or anybody else. But what's unfortunate is it's a thing that now, like, that's a part of that experience. And that's as somebody who's committed to doing better, I've got to take that back and think about that, work on that. And then I had a conversation with one of my coworkers to sort of say, I realized after this is I need to have an answer to that question if I'm going to help facilitate these spaces, because I can't bumble that. Like, I need to have I'm more practiced in the hearing the story, but then not following it up with what my story than I am with the like, how do I pivot in a way that doesn't take up this oxygen, but that doesn't decenter the story that needs to be told, and so on. And that's work that I have to do. That's what love and grace ask of me. And that to tie that back into what we were saying. So, there's a part of me that's always a little bit like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm gonna be ever set out as an example of anything positive to do with anything, because I'm always in that failure and fraud mode that so many of us, I'm either a failure or a fraud, and they can be one or the other. But that takes me back to this active hope piece, which is that active hope, Joanna Macy says, is hope that chooses to live in a story that the world is changing toward the better, not because it is and couldn't go any other way, not because we're in some massive sci-fi movie about progress, but because there are people like yourself, like me, who are committed to going back to the relationships that hold these conflicts, that hold these systems of oppression, and we're committed to trying again, and we're committed to beginning again. And knowing that there are literally millions, if not billions, of people on this planet who are also equally interested in that, then I rest in the hope that all of that work that I can't see but a tiny part of is something I choose to join, and I activate myself on behalf of that hope. And I activate my relationships, my choices, my life ways to try to align with this story that a lot of people are living within. And I won't always see signs of it. I won't always be able to measure it. But participating in it is enlivening.
Yeah.
Turning the camera on today and seeing your face and knowing the conversation we're going to have, that brings me to life.
Yeah. Awesome.
That's like me turning to the sun. That's me saying, okay, yes, let's keep going. I'm exhausted, but that's the sun, and I got to turn to it.
Wow. I feel the exact same way. I have 3 more questions.
All right.
So given that, right, given this idea of this active hope, and that there are people like us out in the world that are really committed to this, digging into the greater part of humanity and the greater thing among us. I've been really afraid lately, just I stopped looking at the news, but do you think that there are enough of us that we can stop this destruction, the ultimate, I mean, I'm saying ultimate destruction.
Yeah, right.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah. Let me go back to Joanna Macy for a second.
Please do. Speaking of hope.
She is a mother of the movement in a real way. And so like I'll speak of her wisdom that helps me, and because she's been around a long time. And her main areas of work is in climate change. And of course, we know that we're not making anywhere near. And of course, Black and Brown and Indigenous folk have bear the disproportional brunt of that. She says that there are 3 stories that people are living in at any given time. One is the business as usual story, and that is that like, we'll just keep going. We'll keep building our businesses and, doing life as it is. And yeah, we might have to change this or that, but like, we'll do a little performative thing. We'll make them happy. We'll be seen to be doing something. And then but probably things are just going to keep going. Right. So that's story 1. And a whole lot of people live in story 1.
Yeah.
Right? And story 2 is, oh my God, the world is going to hell in a handbasket. Everything is, civilization is collapsing. Like the economies are collapsing. All the bad that we see is evidence of the greater collapse that is happening. And, yeah, I suppose we should do something about it, but probably it's not going to change. And I'm not all that effective. And I mostly live out of the fear and anxiety and ultimately paralysis that impending collapse creates in me. And the third group, and you may recognize this term, or somebody listening might, that of what is the great turning. And the story of the great turning is the story of millions and eventually billions of people waking up to the realities of the injustices and the systematic destruction of each other and ourselves that we're participating in every day. And that because of the phenomenon of discontinuous change, which is one of those that I love, right? This idea that change is happening not because it's this very clear thing all packed together that we can sort of see and measure, but discontinuously, meaning it's all chopped up and it's happening this here and there, right? That because of this force of discontinuous change and these people who are participating in the Great Awakening, we choose to live in that story. And she advises us not to argue about which story is true, because all three are being lived. And some days I live all three. Some days I start up as business as usual. I open the news and I absolutely go to collapse story. And then maybe I find my breath and I find somebody to talk to and an action to take, and I end my day in the great turning. And that's all okay. You know, the key is to recognize that we have a choice. We have a choice as to what story we choose to live out of. And we don't know how it'll turn out.
Yeah.
For good or bad. But that not knowing is an opportunity. What that not knowing means that might go a better way.
Yeah.
And if I have to choose how to spend my day, I will choose as much as I can to participate in this idea of the great turning. And so Joanna was specifically talking about climate change. I would put it in the larger scope of which land and species and nature are part of the systems and the communities that we inhabit, and need to be a part of those conversations as well. And so the wholeness, whether we talk about that and come at that conversation of needing to be whole and needing to be well, and whether our entry point is our experience with a particular kind of oppression, a particular kind of privilege, whatever it is, the wholeness requires all the parts. It requires all things to be well, right? We won't get rid of racism while environmental degradation continues to happen. Those things they're not separated.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And so we've got to, but again, there's a freedom in that. At the same time, there's a freedom in that, because what it means is that the gifts that Michelle Majors has developed, has come into this world with, has shown up with, are exactly what the whole needs. The whole needs Michelle Majors to be Michelle Majors, and the more Michelle Majors that we can get, the rest of us are going to be better. And so there's a freedom, because there is a little bit of like the shame game and the guilt game about what I am not, or who I am not, or what skills I don't have, or the things I don't know. I can let go of those for a minute. I might need to develop some new skills and some capacities. That's still true. But I can let go of the weight of the world, because I don't have to carry the whole world. I have to carry me, and I have to be responsible to the relationships I have, and then choose a path of accountability and commitment in those relationships.
Oh, why are you looking at me when you say that, Bjorn? Oh God,
You're in front of me.
Automatically what I heard was that fraud and failure thing. And I'm
like,
oh. And also, like I've been having resistance around videos and putting stuff out there. And I'm like, that vulnerability, and just, I don't have to carry the world, and I don't have to get it perfect, and I don't have to get it right. So that was a little bit of validation. Second question.
Yeah.
What exhausts you as a white man?
Such a good question. And I don't think I've ever been asked that. So thank you for that question. Oh boy. I think I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted by the crap that I got born into. That yes, I benefit from materially, and I'm privileged in terms of my physical safety in a lot of spaces. But ultimately, I am not satisfied with this world or this life as it is. And I will not be satisfied so long as so many people who don't share my social locations and my histories are continuously made to suffer by the choices of individuals and systems. It is frustrating. It is frustrating and exhausting to learn as a little boy that when somebody well-meaning says to a little boy, for whom love comes relatively easy, you should go love someone
Mhm.
as you love yourself. It's exhausting to learn what a weight that actually is to live out, because it sounds so nice and simple, and like, and now here's your meadow to go frolic in.
Go frolic.
Right? It's like, oh, love, cool, like I'm into it, let's do it. And then you find out that for longer than anyone you know can remember, that has been a tremendously difficult thing.
Mhm.
And that living a good life in a good way with other people, 2023, is so much work.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so much work.
Mhm.
And I would love to be released from that work.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then I'm reminded of how impossible that is.
Mhm.
I cannot be disentangled from the rest of the world, nor would I ultimately want to, because the beauty of life is seeing the face of an old friend,
Mhm.
right? It is finding an image that speaks to two people. Like, there's beauty in that. And so the connection is also the beauty. And so there's no release from that work, but it is freaking exhausting.
Mhm.
And
I,
I'm mourn for Magnus, my 6-year-old. I mourn
mm,
for that, for him, of how much work it will take for him to live in a good way with other people.
so you wouldn't tell him to love people as he loves himself?
No, I would. There is so much wisdom in it, right? It's wise. It's
Yeah,
just far fiercer than it sounds at first.
absolutely. Absolutely. That's great.
You know, I've I try to show up authentically. Questions about, like, is this my place?
Mm,
What what do I have to bring? How do I bring it? It's just been all that emotional and intellectual labor
yeah.
of just asking those questions, and not really having good, clear answers. And it is affirming to hear you feel in this space like this was of value, as it
Yeah.
makes me go, oh, do you know what, maybe I need to get out of my head a little bit about some of the other spaces I'm in.
Well,
um,
I want to add something, and I know
Please.
the last thing I will say, Bjorn, is that one, your energy and spirit comes through the door before the white body does. So people feel that. Second thing is there's so much distrust between white folks and folks of color in these community spaces that sometimes your role is just showing up, modeling another way that white men can be.
That's right.
And what you have to give and what you have to offer is a new possibility for white men, for people who do not
Yeah,
engage with white folks, right? For a
yeah,
very particular reason, a valid
yeah,
reason, appropriate reason. And so I think it's important to have different models because we have to do this together. We
yeah,
have
that's
to,
right.
there's no other way around this. And so I feel like that would be that's one of the strongest and most prominent things that sit in my soul is, oh my God, people need another model of
Yeah.
white manning.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's fair, that's
Yeah.
totally fair.
Yeah.
And uh there's a weight to that, because I do also remember the times and spaces, right, where I've intended to bring that spirit, and it's not been experienced that way, or and sometimes it's easy to like dissect things and be like, well, what was the circumstances and so on, whatever. And then you get into the impact and intent and all that, and you just go in circles sometimes. And that's where, like, I try to come back to the, like, look, The people who know me even a little bit will tell you that I'm committed and that I'm going to be there and I'm going to come back. And I've never signed up for perfection. And that's some of the way that white supremacy lives in me, right? Is in my own sense that perfection is going to be how like that's what's required of me to engage in this work. And so I think the growth piece for me over the years has been like, how long do I spin? How long do I spin after I don't show the grace that I want to, or aren't as articulate in saying something as I hope to be, or hadn't thought of something, and now I think now it's 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and I can be like, okay, go and do something else, go and be something else. And I think my life has taken a turn for the better in embracing practice over identity, where I can sort of say I'm going to practice these things, but I will never fully embody them. Don't expect that from me, because you will only be disappointed. I mean, I'll try, right? But it's a practice. It's a practice.
Yeah. All right, Bjorn, thank you so much. Where can people find you?
Yeah. 2 places. I'm on LinkedIn. Definitely connect with me there. And then I have a website called I'm looking around, Looking Bear Leadership, and share some thoughts there. And you can connect with me there too.
Well, thank you so much. We have a standing tradition on this podcast. We always end with a fill in the blank. And the fill in the blank is grace is
transformative.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Bjorn. Everybody, we will see you back next week, and we will talk soon.